presentation. This is the Web3 for state and local government presentation. We're going to have Rhode Island Secretary of Commerce Elizabeth Tanner share how Web3 can shape state and local governance, boosting efficiency, security, and transparency. Drawing up on her Rhode Island experience, Ms. Tanner explores the blockchain potential to streamline businesses, registrations, secure digital identities, and centralize government-citizen interactions on digital platforms, focusing on reducing bureaucratic barriers and stimulating economic growth. Tanner's insights guide leaders and innovators in leveraging Web3 for more accessible, citizen-centric public services. Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here to see all of you. I actually had the pleasure of speaking at the first GBA conference, I don't know how many years ago, and so it's good to be back. My name is Liz Tanner. I am the Secretary of Commerce for the state of Rhode Island. I like to joke that I'm the other Secretary of Commerce from Rhode Island, if you're familiar with Gina Raimondo and some of the programs that she has done, and she's one of the reasons that I'm here. So I'm going to kind of walk you through our story. So little old Rhode Island, small state, but I am an attorney by trade, a small business owner formerly, and I was very frustrated with how hard it was to do business in the state of Rhode Island. And so when Secretary Raimondo was running for governor, she said she wanted to work really hard to cut the red tape, to make it easier to do business. And I said, I want that job. So long story short, I didn't know anybody. I applied, I got the job. I ultimately have been working very hard to cut red tape and make it easier to do business in Rhode Island. But it led me to taking the time to say, okay, what do other states do? And how do they make it easier? Like, why is Rhode Island so bad and every other state is better? At the end of the day, I looked at literally every single state. We all do it the same way. And I'm talking about the physical how to open up a business when you are registering with your version of the Secretary of State's office, Division of Taxation, Department of Labor and Training, things like that. And every state does it the same. So he said, what other places do it well? And I started looking internationally. And that's when I discovered the country of Estonia, of all places. Mike Wise has heard the story several times. But long story short, they were using this new thing back then called blockchain. I thought, what's blockchain? I have no idea what this is. And I started taking the time to learn about it. What was interesting for someone like me was to say, I was spending way too much time trying to figure out how it actually worked. And I really, after spending way too many moments trying to read everything about it, I finally said to myself, all right, this is kind of like how an email gets from my computer to your computer. I don't really care how it gets behind, how it actually happens behind the scenes. What I really care about is how is it going to make my life easier, right? And so I started spending a lot of time thinking about how blockchain could be used in government to make life easier. Around that time, I was actually promoted to be the director of the Department of Business Regulation, which actually oversaw all the financial services for the state. So we were suddenly being asked to take a look at crypto and saying, what do we need to do as a state to make it easier to have those kinds of businesses come to Rhode Island? Long story short, there wasn't that much for us to do, but we basically created one singular license for the crypto market so that they could just have one license rather than having to get a couple. And we really started saying, what could we do with distributed ledger technology within the state? So we had a very curious governor in Gina Raimondo, and she said, let's try to figure it out. Let's try to do a test product. So way back in 2017, we actually put out an RFP, ultimately engaged with a company to say, all right, can we do, we chose to do a CPA credential. You can't get much more boring than that, right? No offense to any of you CPAs in the room. But we said, let's try to do something really boring because it's government. We're very nervous about trying new technologies, and we were very afraid to do it. Long story short, we accomplished our goal. We were the first state in the nation to be able to not only create a credential for CPAs, but also for us, what I was trying to do is, again, make it easier to do business. So we created a singular website where you could use your driver's license to prove that you are who you are through the Department of Motor Vehicles, and then you could go into a system to be able to retrieve your license. So I liken it to a wheel, and in the middle of that wheel is you and your information, Liz Tanner, 123 Main Street, Providence, Rhode Island. And then on the spokes of the wheel is I'm going to get my CPA credential, but I also want to open up my business so I'll be able to register with the Secretary of State's office, the Division of Taxation, the Department of Labor and Training. And so that's what we were able to create. We proved that it could work, and then this thing called the pandemic happened. So while we were doing that project in the middle of it, it was just not a priority. And so we did it, we proved it, it was up and running, and then it shut right down. So we are now in the process of creating that back up again to make it happen, but it has taken years to get to this place where we're finally putting out an RFP to turn it around. So what I'm here to talk about is to say, I'm the kind of people who want to hire you, but I have problems that I need you to help me overcome so that I can hire you. And so what I really want to talk about is, essentially what needs to happen within government to allow businesses like you to come and work with people like me, because I want to hire you. You just need to help me out, make it happen. But real quick, I just want to give a little pitch about the state of Rhode Island. Got to make sure my pin's this right. That's, taxpayer dollars are paying for me to be here. Long story short, smallest state in the nation. We have this a lovely arrangement where everybody knows everybody. So when you want to come and bring your business to Rhode Island, not only do we have a regulatory sandbox, you just call me, and then I figure out who you need to talk to, and we make things work that way. We have the ability and the flexibility and the nimbleness to be able to be flexible with our laws, our regulations, and things like that to bring business. That's how we did it when we first introduced crypto, and we didn't have to make a lot of changes to our laws for that to be there. And living in Rhode Island is absolutely beautiful. All right, that's enough of my pitch. Back to what I really want to share is 5 ways to increase government blockchain projects. And it's very clear to me the most important thing is that the leadership has to come from the top. So whoever you're trying to sell to, whether it's state, local, federal kind of governments, and whoever might lead that organization, you gotta get them on board, because if you don't have the leadership up top, if you don't have someone who's curious, you're just not gonna be able to make it happen, because those leaders are focused on whatever that agency or that government really cares about and what their problems are. We all know that there's a lot of problems going on in the world, and they're focusing on those, but if you've got a leader who is curious, who understands, who's been educated about it, then you're gonna have a lot more success. And you really wanna share with them the scenarios, the examples of why it's gonna be successful and why it's gonna actually be better for them. That's what I had in Governor Mondo. That's what I now have in Governor Dan McKee. They are curious. They want to make it happen. They want to try new technologies. But if you don't have that wherever you're trying to sell, you're really going to have a bad, you're not going to get very far. Which leads me to number 2, because what I see often is I might have somebody who's curious, or you could have a leader who's curious, but they don't know anything good about blockchain because they've only ever heard about the bad press. So number 2 is I need you to help me get rid of the bad press. I rarely use the word blockchain when I'm trying to market this to my governor, my IT department, other things like that. It's got a negative connotation, at least in government, at least the world that I am a part of. And so what I try to do is I say distributed ledger technology, I say technology that's gonna improve things this way and everything else. And I talk a lot about success stories of what other states have done, of what other governments have done, because that is probably the biggest barrier I get is people say, blockchain, that's a bad thing. They don't know what it means, they just know it's a bad thing, right? But that's who I'm trying to work with, and it is hard for me to overcome that very often. I reached out to the head of IT for the entire state of Rhode Island before I came, and he said the same thing. He said, Liz, we don't use the word blockchain either. We use distributed ledger. We just try to say it's good technology, right? Because good tech is good tech, and that's what he really cares about. He needs good technology to make things happen there, and so it's been hard for him to try to do that. Which kind of leads me to my next point, which is the need to create some well-defined use cases, right? So for us doing the CPA credentialing, we knew that was boring as anything, but we knew we needed to have to prove that it could work so that we could bring a level of comfort with new technologies, right? Government is not the first one to throw their hands in the air and say, we're gonna try something brand new. We get nervous about that. However, when there is something new, when the government starts to do it, people have a sense of trust in it then, because if the government's doing it and they're investing in it, well, then it must be sort of good and real. So we know that there's quite a few projects happening across the United States, but there's so much more happening internationally in their governments. I love getting my emails from GBA. I think one came out just the other day where it talks about all of the new projects that are happening across government, across the world. I remember having all of the projects in 2 hands, and now to see it coming is so important. And so it's gonna be really important for you to say, well, look what this country did, or look what this state did, and this is the metrics and the KPIs that it resulted in, because each of those projects are gonna be really important to be able to say, this is what we wanna do because it's going to save time, it's gonna make it easier for my staff, it's going to make it easier for the customer to interact with government, all of those things. We know that some studies show that using smart contracts can reduce the transaction time of something as much as 90%. That's an excellent statistic. I need to hear more and more of those kinds of things. Less paper is important for us, and there are still many states that use a lot of paper to do whatever the transaction might be. When I was director of the Department of Business Regulation, we worked really hard to eliminate all of our paper products that we had, and it was an enormous time saver. So here's just one example. If you wanted to be a realtor in the state of Rhode Island, you would have to fill out a paper form, it would be processed. We found that there was always a mistake if things were done on paper, and that back and forth usually resulted in the interaction with us being about a 2-week period. When we converted it to an electronic system, it went from 2 weeks to 2 hours. Think about that, right? And so I'm now able to say, hey, we're paying for this software to use it for more real estate licenses, but look at what I'm saving. Now, depending on what kind of state you're in, your unions might say, well, that means a lot of people are going to get fired. So you've got to overcome that. You've got to be able to say, this doesn't mean a bunch of people are going to get fired. Those people can be used and upskilled to do additional other work, whatever else it might be. But you're going to have to confront that argument when it comes your way, because you don't want to have a bunch of people getting laid off, because now everything can be done electronically. So you've got to really work through whatever it is you're trying to sell to whatever state agency, whether it be, again, any of those governments, to figure out how you're going to do it. I also want to talk about like the thought of like being in my shoes, right? Because I'll have a lot of businesses come to me and they say, isn't this great? And the answer is, yeah, it really is. I love it. It's awesome. But it's just not the priority right now, right? And so being able to, for you to say, this is why it should be the priority for you, because it will save time, it will be safer, it will be whatever it is you think it's going to be. That's what I need to do as the person who wants to hire you to be able to sell that technology. So try to be in my shoes and understand what I'm trying to work through on the other side of it, because the metrics are really important, and that's what so many people really care about. The big thing that they always care about is the dollars. How much is it going to actually cost? Which leads me to number 4, and that's the addressing the forever costs. When we're doing land titles, you keep those records forever. But when I'm keeping my CPA credential, how long do I really need to keep that? And then government would have to pay to hold that information forever. I need you to help me address the forever costs that are associated very times with holding that information forever. So I don't know what it is in every other state, but I know in Rhode Island, and I think it's with the IRS, you got to keep your records for like 7 years. And so how do we do it right now? If it's a paper-based product, those papers, they go into some storage facility and we pay for that storage. Then after 7 years, we get rid of it and we fill it with new. But as the process of getting rid of paper and going to more electronic is there, it's held onto a software system. Maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's not, maybe it's just on a drive somewhere in state government. Everybody's going to be different. But the point is I can get rid of that information and drop it after a while. If it's going to be held on the chain, then it's held forever, and then it gets very expensive. So again, in talking to my IT CTO for the entire state, he said, Liz, we just can't pay for that stuff forever. It's just going to get more and more expensive as it goes on. So help me find a way to cut it off so that we don't have to keep that information forever for the things that you don't want to keep forever, like your CPA license, your fishing license, whatever it is that you might be doing within the technology that you have. One of the things also about costs is that conversion. What you are all doing is awesome. It's so cool. I love it. It's so exciting. Those metrics are there for many of the products that you want to sell to me. I totally agree that we should be doing that work. But we're also coming off of systems that could still be completely paper-based, or they might just be ancient. When I first became the director of the Department of Business Regulation, we were using a software system from 1968 to produce all of our contractor licenses, all of the construction workers that do the work in where you live. And when we needed to move the machine, we knew that when we moved the machine, it was going to fail forever. That was it was the software, I'm not even sure if you would call it software, was connected to the machine that printed out the cards that the contractors used. So we couldn't even move a machine without being able to introduce new technology. So very often you're dealing with governments that are dealing with prehistoric ways of issuing licenses or credentials or whatever it is the products that they're doing within government. And so when you're trying to get them out of a paper system, that's sometimes a good opportunity to get them straight into a good software system. But if you're using some sort of old software, they ideally want to just use the same one or the upgrade of that one, right? So when you're making your pitch to say, no, I've got some really cool technology, I want to be able to have the opportunity to ask for more. Very often it's just these people, the ones who are looking at the paperwork, who are processing it all, they just don't know, right? They only know what they know. They only know what they've ever had. And so, that really leads to my last recommendation is we've got a serious education piece that we have to take care of, right? And so whether it's from the people who are doing the work, to the people who manage them, to the leaders who lead that agency, to the governors, mayors, whoever's running, whatever it is falls underneath there, trying to educate them on what the possibilities are and how much time, energy, all of that you could save them is going to be particularly important to get that information out to them. But it's also the legislators, right? So when you think about legislators, I actually looked it up. The average age of a state legislator is, anybody want to guess? 58. 58. Who said 57? You were very close. So yeah, so 58 is the average age of a legislator. Now, I'm clearly much younger than that, but I just wanted to make it clear that 58, that's the average, right? So you got above and below that. Now, most legislators run because they're passionate about a subject, right? Healthcare, housing, the medical field, whatever it might be. They're usually passionate about something. Not too many people come to be legislators because they're passionate about technology. No offense, but that's just the way it is. Now, you're lucky that most states have at least, I don't know, half dozen who might actually kind of be up and understand stuff. You know, I know in Rhode Island we have a couple, and so you go to them to say, hey, I'm really interested in this. Can you help me sort of support it? But the reality is that in order for legislators who will ultimately fund the projects that you want to be able to implement within government, you've got to educate the legislators. And that means sitting down with the right committee chairs, whatever committee, technology committee, they call it lots of different things in different states, but sit down with them and say, this is what the technology is, this is how it works, this is what it can do for you, this is the money it can save. Because legislators are always looking to save money, and they're always looking to try to do something that's going to be a big splash, a big win, right? And so if you're able to bring that to them, you can do that as well. The legislators, they also want to hear from you because they want to be able to show their constituents that they're doing new and good things for the people they've been brought on to represent. And it's got to be on a continuation of basis too, to be able to sit down with them on a regular basis and say, and this is the new thing that came out, and did you know that this country was doing this, and this is how much time they're saving, and this is what they're working on. You know, there's lots and lots of ways to sit down with them, but ultimately it really comes down to maybe hiring a lobbyist, maybe working with whoever controls the dollars. You know, every state's different as far as how that works, but that's going to be really important. So educating not only the people who you want to use to use your technology, it's also the people who are going to fund it. So, you know, so for me, I'm going to kind of conclude here, and then I'm happy to take any questions. But I want to use your technology, so help me make it easier by trying to educate, trying to figure out those forever costs, by trying to get to the right people to share that information. And that way, then we can all be successful and see, I think in my mind, a far better world where it's a whole lot easier to do business with the government. Thank you very much. I'm not sure. Do they want me to take questions, or do you want to do the panel? In the microphone.
I'm a Texas CPA.
We love
and,
you.
I was just wondering if there was any communication with our, I don't know, I think we still do everything with stone tablets nowadays.
No, there was with the National Association that
NASBA?
does the accreditation for it. Yes, it was interesting because from a CPA perspective, one of the reasons we chose CPAs is because, not because they're the most exciting profession out there, but they are a profession that needs to be accredited on the federal level. Now, it's not federal government, it's an association that does it, so NASBA does it from a national level, and so they were very excited about that because an accountant is one of the few professions where if you're doing tax returns in lots of different states, you need to prove that you're an accountant in the home state that you're in. So that's why we chose CPAs. Plus, we knew that they would find it exciting and want to try some new technology. But yes, in that circumstance, NASBA, the National Association, they needed to be able to approve that to say that we were going to have that information go back and forth. Because ultimately, if they had that in all 50 states, think about how much better it would be to be able to just say, I'm accredited in all of these states. So it was a huge win for them. They're very supportive of it. We've talked to them, and I've addressed their board. They're a great organization. We hope we can do a whole lot more with that.
So my comment is on the word that you used, distributed ledger technology. For me, the value proposition in blockchain is trust, and you don't get trust through distribution, you get trust through decentralization. So I would try to avoid using distributed ledger because it doesn't really provide the value that blockchain has. The other question I have is, I've heard Estonia used quite a bit with government's kind of introduction to blockchain. What is it about that program that interested you?
So I'm actually an e-resident of Estonia. If you're not an e-resident, it's kind of cool. I have my card with me, but long story short, it allows me to open up a business in the country of Estonia if I wanted to. But what I was particularly interested in Estonia with, and not unlike the comment about CPAs, is the potential. So what's so exciting to me about what all of you do is that wheel concept, right? Because if I, in the state of Rhode Island, can use my driver's license, and this is how they do it in Estonia, is to be able to essentially say, this is who I am. Now, they don't use a driver's license, they have a card. So it's kind of like, like our social security card, they have what looks like a credit card, and you use that. Now they do some thumbprint recognition too, but they used to just have a plain old, it looks just like a credit card. You can go into that system, and then you can do every single governmental service except for get married and divorced in Estonia. Why do they choose those two? I don't know, but long story short, I can get my fishing license, I can apply to college, I can get my prescription, I can do my banking, I can get my CPA license, I can do all of these things off one wheel. And so that's what's super exciting to me in Rhode Island, is the ability to say, wait a minute, we're gonna create that wheel, you're gonna have one website to go into, you're gonna use your driver's license, and then you're gonna be able to do whatever's on the wheel. So we're starting with business registration, Secretary of State, Division of Taxation, Department of Labor and Training, and then there'll be the CPA license just because we have that one done. But won't it be awesome if you could just add more and more and more and more to it? And that's what Estonia's done, and a bunch of other countries are starting to do that now. It's very exciting. But you know, for me, think about what it looks like, I don't know how many years down the road, I'll probably be dead by then, but if you could connect local, state, and federal and have all of that in one place, you know, you can separate it out so that you don't have to worry too much about cybersecurity or fraud or any of that stuff, but be able to just do everything in one place rather than, you know, in the state of Rhode Island, we clocked it out. If you want to open up a restaurant, you have to go to 12 different websites to fill out a variety of different forms, depending on what kind of restaurant you have. 12 different websites versus one. That's the stuff that I care about, trying to make it easier to do business.
So I have a question. I'm in the blockchain technology space, and with the experience that I've had with government sales in this, right? What we find is a lot of blockchain solutions cater to different departments. So you would have a solution which would be catering to, you know, 2 or 3 multiple departments, and you end up playing a ping pong game between these departments, and you're never able to close the ecosystem of you know, governmental bodies. So what do you recommend what a business should do in that case?
I mean, that's exactly what I'm trying to do is get rid of that ping pong ball effect. I call up this person, they send to that person. They call up this person, send to the next person. You know, imagine a place where in the middle, again, in that wheel, it's Liz Tanner, 123 Main Street, and it's just that name forever. Think about what your business is, right? So how many of you have a business? I always use the example of the ABC restaurant. On some forms, you might say the ABC restaurant. Sometimes you might say ABC restaurant. Sometimes you say ABCs. That is such increased level of fraud for you because you have all these different names. And how am I supposed to know for sure that you are the same the ABC restaurant in all those places? So being able to have it all in one place with one name, that's your permanent name, that will reduce the chances of fraud. And so it avoids that ping pong effect because you start there, and each of those places that you're trying to do what you need to do knows that you are Liz Tanner, the ABC restaurant.
Thank you for doing all this work. It's amazing. What I thought about when you were asking all these questions is that you are creating a blueprint pretty much for the entire country, meaning if you can accomplish that as a, you know, to get all these statuses and all these applications, then hopefully the rest of the states are able to, you know, copy that blueprint. What's happening in the construction, architecture, and other programs is that they are creating blueprints to build houses or to, you know, and people just download that blueprint and that's it. So, yeah, and the perspectives of trying to have everything in one point is good, but also it has to be in a decentralized, open, transparent, and acquiring trust.
You know, Rhode Island is the only state in the nation where we have our state and municipal permitting system on one software system. Now, it's not blockchain in the background, but the point is if you could connect that in to the full wheel, as I call it, a whole process, as I call it, then you could have that all in there as well. And so that's the way to connect the state with the municipality. So if you're wanting to put a roof on your garage, you're going to start in your town, and then let's say for some reason the state has to approve it. It bounces up to the state, they do what they have to do, and then it comes back down. And so being able to track all of that to make sure it happens, that's great. But if I can tie it into everything else that I'm trying to do and it knows that I'm Liz Tanner, 123 Main Street, then that's the beauty of having it all in one place. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're looking forward to being on a panel next.
So we're going to continue on with this theme on Web3 and state and local governance with a panel. So government and tech leaders are going to discuss Web3's potential to enhance state and local governance. Utah County Commissioner Amelia Gardner. She is going to be able to share some insights from creating blockchain-driven public services, like the first end-to-end marriage online license portal. We're going to have Virginia Delegate Michelle Maldonado emphasizing strengthening the digital privacy and security with Web3. We're also going to have Rhode Island Secretary of Commerce Elizabeth Tanner join, who will explore blockchain for secure digital identities. And Arjun, is that how you say it? Arjun, very good. A co-founder of Mizzle highlights the decentralized technology's role in environmental tracking, secure voting, and healthcare data.
Well, thank you. I am excited to be here and to lead this panel. I know when these events started, I think it was January of 2020 was my first GBA event. And at that time, as I would talk about the work I was doing, there was nobody else in government doing it. And as the years go by and more people like yourselves end up on the stage, I get more and more excited that, you know, things are going in the way that the vision that I saw about 5 years ago. We're going to start by kind of introducing each of you. And what I would like you to introduce, not only your name and your current title, but I would love to hear how you got interested in emerging tech. And let's just start with that. Let's start with your name, title, and how you got interested in emerging tech.
I've been already able to do it, so I'll pass it off here.
Good afternoon. I am Michelle Lopes Maldonado. I'm a delegate in the Virginia House of Delegates, and I will say I am one of those legislators that ran because I was so excited about tech, very nerdy, and I'm a recovering tech lawyer and tech business leader, and I've had a love for technology, new and emerging technology since I was a little kid. I thought I was going to be an engineer. My father is a math teacher, and he sent me to engineering camp, and we did calculus every day for 5 hours, and I said, nope. But still loved being in the space and the co-creating. So I founded our Virginia Technology and Innovation Caucus for the Virginia General Assembly, and the very first presenters that came to talk to our caucus was Virginia Blockchain Council. So we are in it, and we are doing lots of work around AI and related new and emerging technologies.
Right. So I'm Arjun Mishra. I've been in blockchain and AI since, I think, 13 years now. So it's since 2011. I mean, one of the pioneers in the industry. Luckily, we got a chance in a couple of countries to implement some of the largest implementations of blockchain. Currently, we process like 70 billion transactions a month, per month. And so in India, we shifted the entire telecommunications industry on blockchain. Every call or message that goes across actually is on blockchain. And similarly, multiple different use cases we've implemented in the past few years. And again, very looking forward to how GBA and other communities have been helping the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I loved your story. I was the opposite. I wanted to be a lawyer and then ended up an engineer. So I don't mind doing calculus all day. I myself am also a self-ascribed nerd, so that I see that this is going to be a great panel. I would like to know, and I think that the audience would be interested in, what technology project have you been involved with in the Web3 space that excited you the most? I would love to know what that application was, and and if you're finished with it. So let's start at the end.
So I've had the great pleasure of talking about, what I want to do, but for me, what's been most exciting is the land titling. So I actually have a background in title insurance and working for a title company and being a real estate attorney. So I'm intricately familiar with how valuable the tools now could be in that space. So to me, that's the most exciting project that I'm seeing come out there, and the ability to be able to hold that information forever is what I see as a great entree for many states to get into this, into the new technology for that. So that's, I think, land registration titling is the most exciting one so far.
I think the sky is not the limit on this issue. And what I will say from a policy legislative standpoint, we brought forward blockchain legislation back in 2022 or 23, and it was turned into a study. It was recommended to go to our Joint Commission on Technology and Science that kind of processes a lot of things. And so we were able to pass legislation this year that turned it into a study. And so we know that the recommendation, there is a meeting today or this week, we will be recommending through JCOTS that we establish an advisory work group to look at blockchain cryptocurrency use by state government, but also standing up a blockchain cryptocurrency commission kind of thing. So we're trying to move that forward, and that's exciting because we really need that guidance and that infrastructure, and hopefully at some point a regulatory sandbox to get things going forward.
That sounds great. Arjun?
Yeah, so I founded a company called T-Ledges, as I mentioned. So what we did there was, in India, there is a core problem that every message that goes across could have a link, URL link, or there could be phishing calls that go across to people, and then they end up getting scammed. So that was a major problem that the government was also foreseeing. The financial fraud that was happening was so high that it was more than the whole size of the whole telecommunications industry combined. So it was in, I think, $25 billion worth of losses were happening to consumers. So with the implementation, we reduced the financial frauds by 92%. So that was the metric that it came down to. And similar implementations in different countries like Singapore and Dubai that have happened have really helped us really implement these solutions in the government sector.
Yeah, that sounds great. As you think about the future for each of your areas, what is the number one hurdle that you feel that your state or locality or company are facing in achieving a future that really adopts emerging tech at a broad scale? What's your number one hurdle that you see that needs to be addressed?
I guess I'll probably highlight, something I said earlier, which is it's the dollars. It's the dollars to make it happen, right? So, that's why it was so great that we had that earlier panel talking about how to grow and support your companies. But ultimately, you're trying to get the business from the government to make that happen. And so, it's not cheap, right? And there's a lot of other priorities. So, being able to have a level of confidence that it's going to work from other places is a way to have it happen. And where I've seen success with some businesses is doing it for free and letting the government kind of test it out for you. And then you've gotten a case that you can say, no, it does work, and go from there. So for me, it's the dollars to actually make a project happen. And then to the point that Virginia's doing is getting people to really understand what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, I would pick up on the understanding piece. When we first brought legislation forward, our legislators didn't understand it. And when people don't understand something, the first reaction is no. So we have a huge lift in educating our legislators, educating our executive and judicial branches to make sure that they are equipped to be able to address these issues. And I also think it is, once there is more receptivity, which we're starting to see, it does get back to funding, even at the government level. And one thing I will say, that if you are working in this space and have ideas around blockchain that can be used for national security purposes or anything like that, InQtel is a great organization, nonprofit, that was founded by the CIA about 50 or so years ago, that looks at that technology. And so there are many places where people are trying to look at cutting edge things that help create very, very secure structures.
So in this aspect, I would like to say that from a user perspective, right? So there are two issues. I think there are two problems why the adoption is so slow. One is the user experience itself. We are all trying to make the technology too technical. Whenever we're trying to talk to the government or even between ourselves as businesses, we all try to put in so many technical terms in the whole subject matter, and even the user interface of the products, if you see. It is very hard to use these blockchain products. I mean, using a Web3 product would be like going to a MetaMask, doing 10 number of actions. I mean, if you can get rid of all of this and come back to a standard platform of how Web2 businesses and their interfaces work, or how they talk to businesses, or how they talk to government, right? So they talk to government in terms of general value additions that they're doing, bringing forward for the government. And that's how all of the crypto industry or the Web3 industry also needs to do. Instead of talking very technical or how the whole technology itself will work. The second thing that I see in this is the crypto and DLT, as Liz was mentioning, they are very, I think the education is lacking in this area, wherein a lot of people get confused between these two, and they use them synonymously, but they're not actually. And making the governments and the top executives understand this is what it is going to take.
No, I think that's fantastic. I want to highlight those three things because as someone who's been in this space in government for a while, every one of the things that you said really resonated with me. So let's underscore that for folks. I honestly don't think we could have scripted this better. So we have the funding, which absolutely, amen, the funding, and you have to show that ROI. I think your suggestion was fantastic. Let the government try it. It's almost, getting them hooked on it, saying that this is easier, this is better, faster, cheaper. But they don't know it's better, faster, cheaper till they have it. So that was a great suggestion, and absolutely, I think that the funding, even from the government level, is the biggest challenge. I would love to underscore, do you call yourself delegate or representative? Do you go by? We're a delegate, okay. In what you were talking about as the delegate was talking about for Virginia, one of the things that I have found, education and understanding is a huge barrier. And I think that the committee that you're creating is so fantastic. In Utah, we created what we call our Digital Innovation and Blockchain Task Force. And it has 5 members from the Senate that the Senate appoints, 5 members that the House appoints, 5 members that the governor appoints, and then the state treasurer and attorney general. And we've gotten to the point now, we've been doing this for 4 years, that the legislature, they still don't understand the technology. And by the way, trying to explain this technology to a part-time delegate whose day job is rancher is not going to happen. We have one in my state. His name is Representative Chu. He's a fantastic human being. And every person who tries to explain Bitcoin to him, it doesn't work. I finally got through to him one day when I said, I have 4-H boys. Do you have any bummer lambs? He said, yes. I said, great. I pay them their allowance in Bitcoin. Can we come to your farm and pick out some bummer lambs for my 4-H boys, and can they pay you in Bitcoin? And he says, I don't know how to do that. And I said, that's cool. You don't need to know. I'll just show you Coinbase. We'll get you Coinbase. We'll hook it up to your account. They'll pay you in Bitcoin, and the cash will show up in your account. But we didn't explain the technicality, and that actually leads right into the technicality. Get as much technical out of there as you can. Like, quit having technologists try to talk to legislators. This is a bad idea. Just tell them how it's going to be better, faster, cheaper, right? Don't tell them how. So I love that we could not have underscored that. And I think we're all saying and seeing the same thing. This is great. This kind of leads me into my next. What could the future look like if we have governments that are adopting emerging technology? Like, what is the vision that gets you excited on the future of governments adopting this technology? And I think we're on a roll here, so let's just stay with the same. Let's start with Liz, Michelle, and then Arjun.
I mean, for me, it's that interconnectedness. If you could have municipal, state, and federal government, you just put one number in, and then you could do everything you needed to do. I mean, how cool would that be, right? You could use one credit card. It's in there. You perform all of your services, and then again, it prevents that level of fraud, that level of confusion, that interconnectedness to know the ability to hold your information in one place, to be able to retrieve it at a later time. I mean, there's just so many amazing uses for it. I mean, we've got a long way to go, but to me, that's that's the mecca, right? Like that's the way we could really make this work, and you could see so many efficiencies. You know, what are you saying? Better, faster, cheaper?
Yeah, better, faster,
better, faster, cheaper. Better, faster, cheaper. I think that's you know, that to me is the beauty of it all. Again, in my passion to make it easier to do business, that's the way to make it happen.
I just have to say, to see someone who would be titled a bureaucrat get that excited about interconnectivity, like nerds like us are loving this right now. I mean, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of helping to alleviate suffering and these sort of pain points. So when I think about what's possible, I think about our veterans who are in very difficult situations with medical care and how that's not connected as efficiently as it could be, and being able to get people in there more quickly, to be able to get services more quickly. I think about our elders who are increasingly subject to very sophisticated scams and elder financial exploitation from outside this country and inside this country, and what would that look like with our financial institutions to provide better security. I look at how we may be able to do things like retail and some other pieces. So I'm super excited about how we can help not only provide better security, but also provide better confidence and trust and efficiency.
That is so fantastic. I always tell people that the reason I work so hard to enable remote services and I want to expand remote services is exactly that. Expecting someone who is trying to fight their way into survival every day, expecting them to take a day off work to step foot into a brick and mortar government office, you know, or the single mom that's dragging 3 kids. I mean, just as we go on and on, it's truly an equalizer that it doesn't matter where you are in your socioeconomic path, what disability you have, what age you have, what your ability to have transportation. It truly allows government to serve the people. That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Arjun?
Right. I think the whole thing will start with shifting the identity use case on blockchain. I think with that use case, we can cater to a lot of problems, as Liz was also saying. You can have multiple data points coming on together to a single individual. You can have a beginning of an interconnected world when a single person's identity, your own citizenship's data starts coming onto a single platform. I mean, I can ask you, today, even a single individual cannot prove that he does not have a criminal case against him. I mean, if I'm sitting here, I cannot prove that. There is no application that I can pull out and show that. And if you have to do that, you have to go to a police verification or n number of processes that are there. The matter is that the data is so fragmented all across, right? You're not able to aggregate that data and reconcile it. And I think that is the future. All of this fragmented data coming together to a single point and getting connected to the individual. It could be healthcare data, it could be his own banking, financial data, and all of the fragmented state data. Yeah.
I think that's great. I think if we kind of combine all of those, it really comes down to the idea of you controlling yourself and in your identity, right? Whether you're interacting with a federal, state, or local government, you have the control of that if it's in one space. Regardless of what your situation is, you have control of that. And I agree. I mean, trying to prove a negative is so incredibly difficult. And why are government entities controlling all of that, right? This really brings that control back to the extreme minority, which is the individual. And that gives you the ability to control that. I absolutely, I love that. Now we have a few minutes left for questions, but before we get to that, I want to ask each of you one last question here that came through on as we were doing our prep for this. I wanted to ask what specific legislation, so whether this is at a state level, a federal level, or what law needs to be passed. I would say 1, maybe 2 examples of what you think would help you individually, or perhaps if you've already done this, what advice would you give to other governmental entities? How do they get started? What is the most critical legislation that either you're facing or you would recommend?
So this is a critically important piece, right? So as the receiver of laws that are passed, then you have to implement them. I'm really nervous about blockchain legislation, to be perfectly honest with you. And let me tell you why. So back in 2016, 17, when I got into this space, we were competing with Wyoming, right? Because Wyoming was passing legislation. Well, come to find out, it's because they had to. They couldn't sell cryptocurrency with the way their money transmitter laws were set up. And I believe something like 38 states had the proper money transmitter laws to allow for crypto. And so we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to change any of our laws. Whereas Wyoming and apparently a couple other states needed to actually do something to make that happen. So for a while there, it was, well, Wyoming's passed the most amount of legislation for blockchain, so they're better. And I'm not going to say whether Wyoming's better or not, Rhode Island is, but that's another story. But it wasn't about the volume, it was because they had to do it versus the rest of us didn't. And then I did speak earlier about how we had 2 licenses, and so instead we created 1 license. But what I see every year is a bill that's drafted by somebody from the industry who is saying, this is what I think you should do. And I will say that most of the time, they're very well intentioned, but it doesn't actually work. So if you've got some legislation you want to get passed, go reach out to the agency that actually has to implement what you're putting forward so that they can work with you to say, that's not going to work this way, but it might work this way. Because if you're going to put something up that we know isn't going to work, then we're going to have to fight against it to make it not work, especially if it's going to cost us money to make it happen, and we're not going to get funded for it. So instead, work with the state agency. So we I kind of put my hand up earlier in 16, 17, had the crypto companies come and talk to us, and they used us, we talk about regulatory sandbox. So we have one in legislation already, it's just sort of there. And so they would come to us and they'd say, well, Liz, tell us what we need to do to all work together with a variety of states. And so we talked to about 100 different companies, lawyers, things like that, within a maybe year and a half period for them to kind of just bounce stuff off of us. And so we didn't need a ton of legislation. So legislation is not necessarily a good thing. What Virginia, what Utah are doing by creating these commissions, that's a good thing, right? Because you're getting people in a room to talk. They're then getting more and more people interested, more and more people educated, ideally more and more legislators who will fund it. Like, we don't have that in Rhode Island. I guess I wish we did. So that's smart to create that. But when there's laws for some other things, right, and I'm not, everybody's kind of got the thing that they really care a lot about. First, see if you even need it. And second, really talk to whoever has to implement what you're trying to do. Because what I have found through my research of, we looked at probably a half dozen other countries' legislation for allowing certain kinds of new technologies. And we found that we didn't need to do anything to make it work. Unless you want to do something special that has to be changed. So let's just say it's some land titling thing or some voting thing or things like that, right? So, but to just allow the technology in general, nothing had to be done for us to make it happen, right? Our privacy laws were solid, our cyber laws were solid, everything else that goes with it. So, so I would be careful with what you introduce, but don't just go rogue and try to put something in with a legislator. Work with the agency that's going to implement whatever you're putting forward.
That is such great advice. I think the fastest way to kill a bill is to not work with the agency who has to implement it. That is absolutely the best way to kill the bill. Well, and even to your point, sometimes the law doesn't have to be changed in order to implement this for voting or for land titling. Sometimes it's an administrative rule, and that's a lot easier to get an administrative rule changed, right? I mean, federal law already requires that you provide an electronic ballot to overseas and military members. And I think 32 to 38 states, I can't remember exactly which, but it's in the 30s, their law already says for an electronic return of a ballot, right? And so the key would be that you just do it for the demographic or in the way that it already works. Such great advice. All right.
Real quick, just on that, for us, it was the definition of the word electronic, because in Rhode Island regulations, it says fax. So we would have to change it to take out the word fax to allow electronic to be a more general term. So like, it's just, sometimes it's that tiny little one singular word.
Right, and that's a lot easier to accomplish than a whole big bill that you've paid a lobbyist tens of thousands of dollars to write. It's an easier way to do it. I love that. All right.
Yeah, so I agree. I think any legislator worth their salt is going to bring in the agency. And if you're approaching a legislator because you're not sure where to begin or which agency to start with, I would recommend that you also say which agency, because you want to have the correct stakeholders at the table. And it is true that sometimes you don't need legislation to do a number of things at the agency level, but here's where 2 areas where I think it's important to think about it. The first is if you have to go and shore up your data privacy act that's at the state level, or your AI or any of those kinds of things, or looking at definitions, that's going to be critical. The second is, remember, the legislative branch also carries the purse strings. So if there is a budget associated with this, you're going to want to perhaps work with a legislator to carry a budget amendment or to incorporate it into a new budget to make sure that it doesn't get stripped out. So you're having a champion, because a governor can kind of put it in, other people can put it in, but if you don't have champions on the Appropriations Committee and others, it potentially could get stripped out. So those are the two areas I think you want to be careful, but I'm a big fan that if you're trying to do something, talk to the agency first to see if legislation is necessary, and if it's not, whether you need any kind of definitional changes or budget support around it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think working closely with the agencies or the regulators of that specific industry is very important, as well as coordinating with the local associations or blockchain associations like the GBA itself would definitely help get streamlined whether actually a regulation is required or not for that particular project to be done. Apart from that, I think most of the use cases where the financial regulation where the regulation has to be done is in the financial industry, wherein if you have a product which is actually dealing, for example, with the money transmitter law or any of the cross-border transactions that is being catered. I think for those cases, governments, state government or a federal government could come up with a regulatory sandbox which could definitely help out the businesses execute that.
Thank
That
you,
would be the
Arjun.
use case.
I would add, just from my experience, the two most valuable things I think that we've done that enabled future innovation. Number one would be the task force. Create some sort of a task force or a working committee that can have expertise that your legislators can trust. They won't feel like they have to understand all the technology if there's a group of trusted experts that they can listen to. So I think the task force is the most important. And the second would be the sandbox. I think you've both mentioned the sandbox. Utah also has a sandbox law, and this allows innovation to occur. So those are the two that I think I would start with that we've done and have enabled a lot in the future. Well, before we finish, I wanted to take some questions from the audience. As people think of their questions and get lined up for that, I just wanted to underscore that this has been such a phenomenal conversation. You guys absolutely are on the cutting edge, and you're doing it the right way. And I love seeing this, and I think it's great to see that we've got people basically from coast to coast. I mean, Utah, we're way out west, and here on the East Coast and in New England. I think I love the fact that we've got a broad coalition now of people that are leading the charge. Maybe Washington, D.C. will start to listen if they see the states leading out on this. So I appreciate the work that you have done, but wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience. Do we have a mic out there by chance, or do we not? Because I know we've got a lot of people online. I want to make sure they get captured. Well, I think there's people online. Yeah, it's the online people.
Thank you so much. Dana Moore from California, outgoing state registrar, vital records and vital statistics. I'm interested to know if you have administrative definitions of blockchain. That's one of the challenges we have. We recently had a law passed that counties can use blockchain for vital records, but the state does not for a variety of reasons. And without that definition, vendors are actually being rather predatory of our rural counties that don't have a lot of resources. They're saying, oh, we'll save you lots and lots of money, when it's actually cost avoidance. And we want to be supportive at the state level, but without that definition, it just makes it really, really hard. And so I'd like to know what you've done to that end. Because I also like the suggestion about industry coming to the organization. In California, we can't really help industry because we can't help them write the legislation. So our technical assistance is very limited. So I'd like to hear more about that. Thank you.
So we actually, in Utah, our law does define these terms. So we have a section of the law that defines these terms and conditions. And in order to help do that, we used our task force. So I mentioned our task force has 17 members on it. There's only 6 of the 17 of us are elected officials. The rest are industry. And so the task force recommended the definitions to the legislative drafters. And we utilized it that way for pretty much the same reason. Is because I was the first local government person that implemented this, but the vast majority of local government people don't have a me on their commission, right? And they can't afford this in their tech industry. And so we created those definitions and worked closely with the state CIO's office. Do either of
You know, it's funny, I was around early enough, we were talking about how to define money. And, you know, how do you define money? And so, you know, again, what we discovered was the 38 states who didn't need to do money transmitter laws had the same incredibly vague definition of money, right? So when you're trying to define a new term, just to be extremely vague and try to find some consistency, right? Because what makes me nervous about certain pieces of legislation is if there's then 50 definitions for blockchain, when the federal government finally defines it, then so many states are going to have to change it so that it is going to match what the federal government says. So, you know, that's a big part of it too that we haven't talked about is pushing the federal government to give us some definitions. Maybe we'll see that now, I'm not sure, but just make it incredibly vague. And if you can, try to do it in regulation or administrative rules so that you can do it a whole lot easier than if it's in law.
Any other questions?
In India, what we did was, instead of using the word blockchain, they have started using the word distributed ledger in most of the applications. That helps them differentiate, and so they call blockchain as a subset of DLT, and then that helps you define the whole thing much more easily. So if you can, I mean, you can look at that as well.
Thank you all so much.
So I love this panel for many reasons. I'm Jackie Cooper, GBA talk show host, as well as co-chair of the legal working group. I'm also in education, so there's a lot of different things that I want to touch on. When you were talking about the idea that talk to the agency before actually passing law to see about implementing, I understand, because being an educator, sometimes top down, we're told that we have to implement certain data collection, and then we have to figure out when and how, because there's not enough time when you're teaching and that type of thing. So definitely, communication is critical. I love the fact that there's a task force. Definitely want to talk to you about how to do that in Maryland, because I've started the Maryland Blockchain Association. The question I have for you is the idea that you suggested that entrepreneurs allow the government to use the products or services for free so they can buy into that. Sometimes you just can't afford that because you need to have things paid for. So I love the idea of a sandbox, but how do you support those that have great ideas that still need funding in order to have it bought by the government, because sometimes there's not that equity of the cash for play. So.
And that's what happened with us. So we put out an RFP, there were responses. There was one vendor who came back and said, we'll do it for free. So guess what? We went with who did it for free, right? So, you know, that was an easy win for us. But I will say that some of the other responders who put stuff in, they put it for very, very low, right? And they stretched out the amount of time, the amount of people, right? And so they found a way to do it. But I have heard of other stories. I don't know if anybody here's from Reno, Nevada, but I remember hearing about them with their marriage licenses. I'm not sure who's it got. I don't know a lot about this, but I believe they did it for free. Again, if you can do it for free, obviously then the government's going to be a little more interested in it. But if you can't, you know, then you're really working with some of the governmental programs for the business that we talked about earlier to try to be able to support the owners while they try to get themselves to that next level.
I think it's one of the things as entrepreneurs that we experience all the time about how do you get the big business, how do you get the revenue stream, and as you're managing costs and trying to grow revenue and scale. So if you can't do it for free, I think there's also some wisdom in looking at smaller projects that you would be competitively priced for in a bid, so that you could get some revenue in and then begin to build, not only build revenue bank, but also build credibility and build network and build muscle in what the vulnerable spots might be, so that then you can then compete for maybe a medium size. But when that's an issue, sometimes you'll need to start with some of the smaller projects before you go for the big ones.
That was great. So that is the time we have today. I wanted to thank our panel and their expertise, and see that you can see there's a lot of great things happening in government, not only in the United States, but also globally. And a lot of this is just happening one step at a time. I think that it's important to remember that we might overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but I think we're severely underestimating what we can accomplish in 10 years. And just continuing on that path will make a big difference. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So we have a 5-minute presentation that will be